There is a lot to say about Mike Macdonald's Michigan defense in terms of scheme and personnel. Really, actually, even said the intro backwards there. Personnel dictates the scheme if you coach and plan in a dynamic and open-minded way. The opposite side of that is your scheme stays the same regardless of personnel if you only coach the way you want to, if you only run things the way you want to run them. So not changing to reflect the type of players you have, that would be static in my opinion. And just watching Michigan's defense for 5 games in 2001, I don't think that's what we have with Mike Macdonald at all. There's going to be a drastic difference between what he runs, and let's assume we're going to see in 2022 something similar to what we saw in Michigan last year. It's going to be drastically different than what Wink Martindale ran last season. You can argue that if you want to, but I'm going to make one point about it that pretty much would destroy that argument, and then we're going to move on. Whether you're a longtime Ravens fan or someone that's really just been watching the team since Lamar came on board, ask yourself this. If Wink Martindale was the defensive coordinator at Michigan last year, what would they have played defensively? They would have played a shit ton of man and used a lot of his organized or creative pressure schemes to try to force the quarterback to get the ball out quick, because that's who Wink Martindale is. You have no film to use to show any other different perspective or scheme that he's going to use. Wink Martindale is going to do what he believes in, and that manifested itself during his time with the Ravens, most of which was very good. But he also became unwilling to adapt in far too many situations, and he oversaw a defense, even during 2019 and 20, that was consistently beat by certain formations and pass concepts, essentially man beaters, and that was his undoing, even though he probably wanted to move on as well. So what I think I found, one of the conclusions I will make after watching 5 games completely and tracking a number of those plays, which I'll detail in a moment, is if you think Mike Macdonald is going to be a Wink Martindale clone because he coached with the Ravens for 6 years before his 1-year stint as the defensive coordinator at Michigan, you really just couldn't be more wrong. All right, so after watching 5 complete games of Michigan from 2021, I data tracked 105 plays with drive, down, and distance, kind of like you see here. I'm scrolling through a document that I will link in the description. It'll be a shared file, viewer permissions only. Some of the coverages that could be like 2-read or any of the TCU type stuff that are various half-field coverages where one safety and corner are calling a certain coverage on one side and another safety and corner, maybe an inside backer, are communicating another field coverage on the opposite side. So some of these coverage titles could be a read coverage. I'm just typing in the actual coverage as it developed post-snap with the route distribution the way it was. So anyway, look, 2021 was an incredible rebound by the defense at Michigan. And here are some elements that I noticed that are drastically different from Wink's system. Number one, and this is the biggest one if you ask me, edge rushers are allowed to do what they do, rush the quarterback. They were not expected to stunt inside repeatedly or switch rush lanes with a D tackle or a blitzing inside linebacker. They were very rarely asked to drop out to cover the flats against the pass, but I noticed 2 specific examples where at this point now I can predict the possibility of an outside linebacker dropping out into the flats, and I'm going to continue to refer to them as outside linebackers because that's what Hutchinson and Ajabo are, so get used to hearing that in this video as opposed to edge player. Another thing, I saw very few examples of a nickel blitz off the edge, like Tavon Young was really explosive at doing for the Ravens. Similarly, not a ton of inside linebacker blitzes off the edge either. Again, they're letting the edge guys do what they're expected to do. To me, that'll be the major difference, and really it harkens back to something that a lot of Ravens fans have referred to, a conversation between Ray Lewis and Dean Pease at one point, I think during a game, where Ray said something like, hey, let the cover guys cover, let the rush guys rush, and let's just execute. Let's just out-execute them. It was something like that, and in my opinion, Mike Macdonald appears to really stay in line with that philosophically. So from what I could tell, the outside linebackers, Ajabo, Hutchinson, and number 90, who's like a Pernell McPhee clone, if you ask me, they were almost always responsible for the gap that they lined up in, whether it's C or D gap. And that philosophy is different. And without me even mentioning other elements right now, I will in a few minutes, you can see that that's a drastically different philosophy from what Wink Martindale did with his edge players. And that's been well chronicled that outside linebackers, DNs, leave Baltimore and they go and they get more sacks. One of the reasons could be just primarily getting more actual rush opportunities rather than dropping out into the flats or gap exchanging with people. But let's get on the same page about something right now before we even really go into the data. Michigan's defense was really bad in 2020. They allowed 34.5 points per game. That year was clearly challenging and demanding, no matter what you were doing, but probably to organize a football program with all of the logistical issues that you had with COVID. So a 2-4 record in 2020 in an abbreviated season. Moving back a year further, 2019, defense was still quite bad. Now they did go 9-4. They finished 18th in the final AP poll, as you can see. But look, they gave up over 31 points per game as a unit, including 56 to Iowa State in the Big Ten regular season finale, and then 35 to Alabama, and I think it was the Citrus Bowl. Move back further one more year, 2018. Harbaugh and Michigan went 10-3. They had a 10-game winning streak at one point after losing their opening game. I think they reached number 4 in the country. However, they gave up 35 points per game, including 62 to Ohio State, and then 41 to Florida in a bowl game. And those last 2 games really skewed that data, but you can still see the pattern emerging even from a cursory look at the data. 2018 to 2020, Michigan's defense gave up over 30 points per game 3 years in a row. There's just no way around that. And then in 2021, Mike Macdonald's only year as defensive coordinator, they gave up 17 points per game overall. Now, they did give up 35 points plus twice. Once to Michigan State, a really physical, rugged team led by Kenneth Walker III, and then in the college football playoff semifinals to Georgia. But a huge improvement in overall play and adherence to responsibility and team defense. We're going to move on from there, but I wanted to just have everyone have awareness of the progression. Look, and Macdonald definitely relied on some experienced coaches. In 2021, really experienced linebacker coach George Hilo, and then defensive backs coach Steve Clinkscale. But you can't argue that Michigan did not make immense improvement under him in 2020. And he'll have the same situation with the Ravens. Anthony Weaver's back as the D-line coach. Chris Hewitt is back to returning to lead the secondary. Brought on Zach Orr to coach the inside linebackers and replace Rob Ryan. Huge improvement there. Rob Leonard coming over to coach the outside linebackers in Miami. And then D'Anton Lynn to coach the safeties. Macdonald brought a guy from Michigan with him, Ryan Osborne, who's classified as a quality control coach. He also got to bring one of his best players in David Ojabo. And as an aside, I'm in the middle of a film study on David Ojabo and his historic season at Michigan in terms of his improvement from the previous year. I will be putting out a short 2-minute film study for Twitter on Ojabo, but I'm going to do one for my patrons. If you're interested in joining that, that's a longer variety that I'll put on a shared file. I think it could be a historic pick for the Ravens at 45. I'm not saying that he's going to be the best pass rusher that we've ever had by any means, because we've had some great ones. But looks, obviously Suggs was drafted at 10, so there's a real difference there in where they were drafted. But it's really interesting to watch Ojabo play. There's a lot of splash plays, but there's a lot of plays where he's taking care of his responsibility and not really making the play that I think would go underrated. So I'm looking forward to producing some content focusing on Ojabo either for Twitter or for my patrons. Okay, so I would say that Michigan was a base 3-4 team in 2021 against most heavy personnel groups. So when I say that, I would mean 21 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. There was some occasional examples where he went base 3-4 against 11, but there was typically a reason for that. So the majority of the data that you will see in the document linked is really at a 4-2 nickel, though, to be honest with you. So just so you understand, in case you're new to the channel, the 2 is the 2 inside linebackers, and the 4 is the 4 guys up front on the line of scrimmage. Now, 2 of those guys in Michigan's defense are typically outside linebackers, Hutchison, Ojabo, or 90. I forgot his name earlier, but it's Mike Morris, really good player. Anyway, the 4-2 designation is to denote that there are 4 guys on or near the line of scrimmage who normally line up near the line of scrimmage. It's a loose description of a defensive personnel group, essentially, and it can either be from a 4-3 platform or a 3-4 platform. So what you have here is 3-4 personnel. It's not exactly a typical 3-4 alignment. It's 3-4 over. The Ravens used this against the Tennessee Titans in 2020 in the regular season and the playoff game, basically kicking their 3 interior linemen to the tight end wing side. So let's talk about where that diagram came from. It was against Wisconsin. I tracked 5 possessions from generally every game. This case, I'm only showing you 4 of them here. I'm not going to talk about each possession from each game in depth. But in any case, I tracked a total of 21 plays. And what you'll see from looking at the chart real quick is that Macdonald was in his base defense, the first play, the opening play of each possession. So you get 4 possessions here where you can see possession 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's the numbers all the way to the left. He's in his base defense look on the opening play of each possession. Typically, he's just matching personnel there. You can see that the the opening play of the first possession, the third possession, and the fourth possession was all 12 personnel. So that's usually indicative of why he went with a base. The opening play of the second possession was 11 personnel. He still went with a base defense. In this case, it was a 4-3, and he had an automatic Mike blitz by number 12 and got a tackle for loss. Just for the purposes of clarity here, I'm going to illustrate these in a moment. So I'm going to alternate between pictures of the base 3-4 that I've already showed you, and then a 4-2 nickel. Now, as you see from this data, there's also 5-1 nickel listed up there. We'll talk about that more later. There's the 3-4 overlook that I mentioned earlier against 12 personnel. So there's the 4-2 nickel. You still have the outside linebackers on the line of scrimmage, in this case Hutchinson to the left and Ojabo to the right. So what's happened as you go from picture to picture, you see one D tackle has been taken off the field and an extra defensive back. That's the 5. So when I say 4-2, what that typically means is 4 guys on the line of scrimmage, 2 inside backers who are part of your base defensive structure anyway, and then 5, which is you don't have to say the last number. Everybody understands that we're adding up to 11. So if you got 4 and 2, that's 6. So you got 5 defensive backs on the field. Macdonald's defense at Michigan spent a ton of time in 4-2 personnel. Now everybody does nowadays because you see so much 11 personnel. As we get near the end of the video, I'm going to give you my NFL comparison to where I think Macdonald's defense can be similar, and I think it might surprise some of you. So now let's take a look at some of the encouraging and really positive signs that I thought I saw in this defense. Number 1, communication. So what you can see here is you can see a DB who's making a hand signal. I think he's touching his helmet with both of his hands. There's multiple guys making checks before the play, not just in this play that I'm showing you against Rutgers. There's always wholesale communication when they change a front or a coverage. I believe this defense will be better at recognizing formations and checking into something automatically than we have been in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I understand that some of you may not like that statement because we have had a highly ranked defense except for this past season. But we had trouble with communication, with even dating back to 2019. If you look at the touchdown pass that the Titans used to open the second quarter of their playoff upset in 2019 in Baltimore, we had a miscommunication in coverage. Now, it's not to say that we didn't ever make adjustments, but there was typically against motion or new formations, the Ravens would just run a defensive back across behind the defense because we're playing so much man. Michigan in 2021 appeared to have multiple checks in. Sometimes they would roll a safety down on motion and play man to the wide receiver that the offensive guy was motioning toward so as to avoid confusion on how to sift out the routes. Sometimes the backside corner on motion away would level off to thirds, essentially playing cover 3 to his side to ensure that no double posts would hit on the backside concept, something the New England Patriots do a lot of. And that would also allow the middle of the field safety to be real aggressive on the front side of the motion. Another thing that I think I noticed is that the scheme had a lot of variation depending on the opponent. And what I mean by that is they showed certain coverages against the really good wide receivers, for example, Penn State's Jahan Dotson, that they did not really show in the rest of these games that I watched. It just means that there's things installed in a particular week that maybe aren't used 1 or 2 or 3 weeks prior. So let me be clear. They bracketed Jahan Dotson specifically with a nickel safety like Daxton Hill, and then leveraged him inside with a linebacker like Josh Ross. That was a very intentional bracket, essentially a double team. And that's very opposite of what a lot of people call a double team, including PFF and other supposedly, reputable sites. They call a bracket, what they call a bracket oftentimes is just a zone defense where second-level players are reading and reacting to the routes, and one's fitting on the inside and one's fitting on the outside. It's not always a double team or a bracket, just because a zone works out correctly underneath. In this case, against Penn State, it was. The coverage and scheme variations that I'm referring to were done to combat a certain player or element of that opponent. So the bracketing and the multiple coverages against Dotson was quite effective. So much so that Penn State ended up putting Dotson as the backside X in a lot of situations where Michigan showed to play basically straight man on the backside of trips. That's a tendency that I have noticed as well. In the case of Penn State, what Penn State did was they actually went quads to one side or 4 receivers to one side and then set Dotson back to the backside as the X, essentially forcing Michigan's hand to play man back there. All right, so all the versatility and being multiple worked against Penn State and Jahan Dotson. It definitely did not against Michigan State. Kenneth Walker bludgeoned them. I thought they got out physicaled, and that's really the only time I can say that after watching 5 games. They definitely tried to be too multiple, and it did not serve them well long term, even though twice in the first 3 possessions, they got interceptions and things looked good. Let's talk about some issues that I believe are relevant to mention at this point. Y-hide concepts. I have seen guys break open multiple times, even when they're covered, specifically against their man-free cover 1 scheme. And those are concepts that Patrick Queen struggled with in his rookie year and even early in 2021. Now, he improved dramatically once Bynes was inserted into the starting lineup, made multiple good plays against Y-hide concepts. I would expect that if there is a global problem with that concept in Mike Macdonald's defense, and I don't think there necessarily is, that it will be cleaned up by all the quality guys they're going to have on the field, Queen, Bynes, and even obviously a coach like Zach Orr. Another issue that I should mention is I've seen running backs open a handful of times against their man-free cover 1 scheme, which Macdonald did have Michigan play often. If you go look at the document that I'll link in the description, you will see that. To me, it seemed like man-free was their go-to on 3rd down. Unless it was like 3rd and really short, in which case they just played cover 0. And since the Ravens have so many safeties and good cover guys on this roster, I don't think man-free will be a problem at all. I just noticed it on film and thought I would include those 2 issues here, if you ask me. Difficulty with Y-hide concepts and some times where the running back sprung open where I didn't think they should have. So having said all that, one of the things that I have also noticed is Mike Macdonald spent a lot of time in 2-high looks last year, as compared to Wink Martindale. Now, there was some rotations to cover 3. You'll see in the document that I linked. I will refer to them as Sky and Cloud. Those are old school names that I learned early in my coaching career. They might be out of use for some people. So there's 2 safeties lined up high as the 3rd level to the defense, as you see here. And if a safety spins down, that's typically called Sky. If a corner stays hard up close to the line of scrimmage and the safety rotates to deep thirds, that's called Cloud. I'm saying that's what it's referred to in my document. And look, with a lot of safeties on this roster, Chuck Clark, Kyle Hamilton, Brandon Stevens, Marcus Williams, needless to say, there'll be a lot of opportunities to show 2-high and rotate to cover 3, rotate to man-free, which Michigan did a lot as well. They would sky down and then play man-free. Now, a lot of old school coaches are not going to refer to it that way. They're not going to say it's a sky, meaning a safety walking down, and then playing man-free. Sky is used to refer to cover 3, and so is Cloud. But in any of the half-field coverages that Michigan played, cover 3, man-free, rotating from 2-high down to 1-high, or spinning back the other way, all of those options will be in play. I think we're going to be very multiple on the back end and very, very good. I see no reason, no indication, absolutely nothing showing that we're not going to be coached at a really high level on the back end. Now, I know he did not bring his DB coach with him, but we've got 2 good ones anyway. Now, I have to be transparent and clear, though. I did find what I think would be considered 3 blown coverages in about 60 plays. I believe it's about 60 pass plays, excuse me. The first one and the only one I'm really going to mention in this video is a 3rd and 10 against Penn State, and they absolutely blew a coverage and allowed number 3, who's a really good slot receiver, to bust wide open over the middle of the field and convert a 3rd and 10. 2 other examples of running backs being essentially uncovered or so wide open that they appeared to be uncovered. 2 Y-hide concepts, as I already mentioned, really springing open against their man-free or their cover 1. So one of the things that you run the risk of doing if you're really multiple is having some blown coverages where 4 guys are playing one coverage and the 5th guy, for whatever reason, didn't get the call and plays another coverage that you didn't want him to play in that situation. 5 plays out of 60. Do I really think there was 5 blown coverages? No, I think there were 2. And then I think there were 3 times where guys were just really, really wide open, specifically running backs who were running out into the flats and inside linebackers were trying to chase them, and they were already out-leveraged by their alignment. 3 out of 60 still seems like a pretty high number to me, and we have a high standard in Baltimore. Having said that, I think we certainly saw some really bad coverage with the Ravens last season, and the job flow chart for our DBs last year was not nearly as wide or demanding as it will be this year. We were really narrowly focused on man concepts under Wink Martindale. You'll be able to see when you look at the document that he played a lot of man as well. But in my opinion, Macdonald will mix up coverages as often as, we use Old Bay here in Maryland, which is a whole lot in case you don't know. I'm interested in how he's going to use different bracket coverages or double teams to limit certain guys on certain snaps. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins come to mind. If that schedule for the Ravens that supposedly leaked is actually accurate, I think the Ravens actually have kind of an advantage playing the Bengals early in that they don't know the coverages that we're going to rely on. Okay, so let's move away from issues or perceived issues and talk about a specific situation where there's a difference between Wink Martindale's scheme and Mike Macdonald's, as we saw it in 2021 at Michigan. Again, we're going to assume that things are going to stay the same, although I know that there's going to be, variations depending on our personnel and who we're playing. So what I'm talking about is third and medium or third and long. There's a lot of man free against Penn State, but not a whole lot against Wisconsin. So what I'm showing you now is not all, but 8 third down plays of 6 or more that the offense was facing. And what you should see is a little bit of coverage variability, and it depends on who they are facing. And that is not something that Wink Martindale typically did. He typically would play his coverage, and it didn't matter who he was playing. Now, in some cases, like the Cincinnati game in Week 7 at home, that really bit us in the ass because they were better than us in terms of our DBs matched up against their receivers. Macdonald will show variability in his third down coverages, and I think you have to. It can't always be, we're going to bring 5 and play man free with the free safety sitting in the deep middle of the field and no low hole dropper. And if you're unfamiliar with what that means, the low hole is essentially the area between the hashes and capped at 8, 10, 12 yards depth. Now, really, it's wider than those hashes because the NFL hashes are really tight together. But anyway, that was Wink's deal, man free with high pressure on third down. Macdonald seems to vary his third down calls more depending on the opponent. That's interesting. And could be a result of personnel or the type of routes that each opponent uses, on film. What's more interesting to me, though, and I think the larger point is it shows adaptability, and Wink just did not do that enough. And look, there's some real veteran coaches on this staff, so I would not expect any highly successful group of coaches to tolerate counterproductive or inefficient coverages like they did last year. Getting back to the data for a moment, if you want to see all the plays of third down and 6 or more, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom of that data of that document that I linked. If you are interested, I actually have information like that for the Ravens offense in a database with the film attached. If there's anybody in my Patreon in the Premier that can vouch for that, you can go ahead and do that now. I hope it can be used by Ravens fans to look for tendencies, patterns, and outliers in terms of personnel formation and play call and coverage. I already have it set up with film from 2021, and I intend to use it during the regular season in 2022. It gives unlimited access to that database. It's part of the $5 package on my Patreon, as well as a Ravens fans Discord that I've set up that currently has like 40 people in it. Okay, so one last element that I'll cover in terms of what coverages Mike Macdonald and Michigan played last year is predictability. Now, certainly I've indicated there was not predictability because I would say he's generally multiple. But occasionally the way coaches will use data like this is to look at certain formations. So for example, what you see on the screen right here is a formation called twin slot, typically an 11 personnel grouping. So the Y is the tight end and the T is the tailback. So that's your 1 and 1 in the number 11. What I saw when I was tracking this data across the 5 games was that the first 10 times I saw the formation twin slot, Michigan was playing cover 1 or man free on 7 of those plays. One of the safeties was walked up into the box. In this case, the example you see here on the screen, it's number 2. So he would be guarding the Y man-to-man. Number 30, which is Dax Hill, the slot DB on the left, he'd be guarding the H man-to-man. The 2 corners would be manned up on number 1. And then some combination of 12 and 25 Banjo reading the tailback to determine who's man-to-man on that guy. As I moved further into the 5 games that I was covering, though, what I found out is that the man-free or cover 1 tendency wasn't as high as I thought. Overall, I tracked 18 plays where Michigan's defense faced twin slot, and out of those 18 plays, on 10 occasions, they played man-free or cover 1. So the pattern that I thought was there initially was not nearly as high. As I wrap this up, I actually got to tell you, I look forward to situations like that where I have a preconceived notion and it either gets proven correct or proven incorrect. That's the reason why I do these things, to be honest with you. I enjoy it, number one. And number two, some people on Twitter asked me to conduct this exercise. They asked me how similar Mike Macdonald's defense might be or how different it would be. I think it's obvious that it will be different, but I wanted to find out for myself. I think there's a lot of blanket statements that get thrown out. And look, that's by people like me, TV analysts, commentators during the game, fans on social media. We all do it, right? We all make blanket statements. But what I'm trying to be about is what the film shows, what the organized data shows, because that's what I understand. Because those blanket statements, instant reactions, or Twitter takes, they're not based in reality most of the time. They're not based on what the film shows. They're based on what preconceived notions people bring into it. And to me, if you don't follow up by watching the film and finding some data for yourself, if you trust other sources, I don't know that you really have your own opinion. You're just parroting out opinions that other people have. What I'm trying to be is a bridge that allows people to see the film, see the data, and then make conclusions on their own. And I welcome people to have different opinions because it's a game that we all love and we enjoy, and we're hoping that Mike Macdonald and the rest of the defensive staff there bring back that Baltimore Ravens style of defense where we can just go into somebody's house and shut them down. Look, this study was a grind for me, but it has to be. I'm not talented enough to watch 5 plays or even 25 and make grand statements on a defense, a coach, and certainly not a player. In fact, I view that as disrespectful. I think that we should be serious and go in depth if we really want to make hard statements that are based in reality. I wish I could chart and label all 934 of Michigan's defensive plays from 2021. But in order to do that, I need a whole lot more of you to join the Patreon and make it financially worth my time to do this. It was a whole hell of a lot of fun. I charted 105 plays. I did confirm one thing, and this will be the 4th time I mention it. Macdonald and Michigan were very multiple in 2021. And he certainly can do that in terms of coverages. And he certainly can do that with the DB talent at his disposal in 2022. Additionally, he let the rush players rush, and that's the key. As a Ravens fan, we're looking forward to someone not putting Odafe Owe in some of those crazy situations and positions that Wink Martindale did last year. I honestly thought I saw some real hallmarks of what great defenses have. Incredible pursuit, good angles, team run fits. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. Multiple coverages that are all played well, that gives the quarterback a moment of hesitation in his pass drop. And again, the most important thing to us Ravens fans, seeing as we lost out on Zadarius Smith, we saw Matt Judon leave and go get a hell of a ton of sacks. This guy's going to trust his outside linebackers and DNs to rush the quarterback and generate pressure without near constant use of stunts and rush exchanges like your basic, TE or ET stunts. The final point I'll try to make will be to link Mike Macdonald's defensive scheme, at least at Michigan in 2021 with the personnel he had, to some NFL defensive coach and what they were able to do. And some of you probably already know what's coming. So get triggered if you want to. The NFL defense I would compare them to in terms of coverage variability and how they let their outside linebackers and edge players be aggressive, and yet they maintain tight coverage consistently, is the Bengals from 2021. Specifically, how the Bengals used 4-2 nickel personnel and multiple coverages to slow down offenses in the second half during their run through the AFC playoffs. Macdonald's trust in pass rushers is similar, if you ask me, to the way the Bengals let their edge guys play. And that's a stark difference, from how Wink had his guys playing. The coverage variability, I think, is going to be similar. We got Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark, Kyle Hamilton, 2 good rookie corners. We know what they can do. They will be effective regardless of the scheme and coverage tendencies, for real. I think over the course of the season, it's going to benefit the 3 guys you see on the screen here. Ojabo, assuming he's able to come back and play and be healthy. Owe and Bowser. The accumulation of more rushes, more reps, is going to accelerate their growth, I believe. We'll see more 4-man rushes, better coverage on the back end, and it's entirely possible that we see our points per game drop in a similar fashion that Michigan's did once Macdonald was named the defensive coordinator. Please let me know what you think of this breakdown. I only showed 2 plays, I think, on film. I typically would like to show more film. People ask me about the tendencies, so I felt like I had to show the data. I'm providing a link to a shared file where you can go look at the data yourself. I don't believe you can edit the document, but you can view it. And look, this is not a finished product. What I mean by that is I only had 105 plays data tracked, but I watched all 5 games. I watched every defensive snap that I had on film for those 5 games. So I don't think, however, that I have all the answers. I think I have some for you, and hopefully I've been able to present them in a somewhat attractive manner, even though I didn't use any film and it was a lot of pictures and we were very data heavy. If you have any suggestions for further breakdowns, be it film study breakdowns, which is what I really, really like to do, or data analysis, which is essentially what this is. Once you aggregate the data and put it in columns, then you can look at it yourself. And that's why I provided the link, because there may be people who notice other elements that I did not, because I was thinking about the end goal, which would be this video that I produced, and other people might just look at the data from a more independent perspective. That's why you have an entire coaching staff, and that's the thing that I think Mike Macdonald may be way better than Wink Martindale at, is utilizing the staff that's already there. I suspect that his linebacker coach and DB coach last year had a huge impact on that team, because they were first-year guys in the program as well, to my knowledge, and we just did not see that type of collaborative thinking from Wink Martindale. You guys, please let me know what you think of the video in the comment section. Consider sharing on social media to help the video get more exposure. If you listen this long, I appreciate you guys checking it out.